Hi everyone and welcome to Cherry Red TV. Today we're going to look at the career of one of the best British bands of the last 30 years. They were the leading light of the UK ska boom of the late 1970s and is still essential listening today. The band is of course the Specials, and I'm joined in the studio today by Paul Williams. Paul's the author of the recently released book Youre Wondering Now, which chronicles the band's history. Paul, welcome.
Hi.
Now, I've read in your bio that your love of ska and the Specials in particular started in your early teenage years. Can you tell us a little bit about how that became such an important part of your life?
I think it's one of those once in a lifetime things that happen when I remember sitting in my living room at home and taking no interest in what was on the TV, and I heard Gangsters, and of course I just looked up, and it was just one of those things I couldn't. I could sit here and I just can't describe what happened. I don't even know what happened, but it's to say I'm scarred for life is pretty much true, really. Do you know what I mean? And from there, it was just a matter of, as you do as a 12, 13-year-old getting into music, it's buying the records. Of course, as you know, with the two-tone thing, there's the image thing as well. So, of course, that manifests itself, and it goes from there. And obviously, it's the political message and stuff that two-tone carried, and the Specials more than the other two-tone bands, should we say. That meant a lot to me as well, and it's just a combination of style and music, and everything that went with it. And I think, why it stayed with me, I mean, I really do not know, but it has, and has been quite a driving force throughout my life, really.
And you went on to actually sort of get actively involved yourself in the genre, didn't you? You ran a fanzine and nights, etc.
Well, basically, what happened there is because by 84, really, in England, the two-tone scene, skinhead ska scene, was virtually finished, really, and Euromantics were taking over, so there wasn't a lot for us to do. So for those that were interested, I thought, well, if no one's going to do it for me, I might as well do it myself. So a ska night, with a few mates, and it grew a little bit bigger, and then I thought, maybe there's still an interest out there. So when I did the fanzine, it was initially a ska fanzine, and I thought, no, I'm going to go two-tone ska fanzine. And what you can do with that is you can implement what's gone on, retro, the old stuff, and implement what people are doing now and a bit of a current news. And once I released that, it was then showed me then that how much the interest was still there, because it went absolutely worldwide. Took over my life, and even more so, having to work in your back kitchen all night, trying to cut and paste the old-fashioned way. So obviously, I knew from then that there was still a big feeling out there for the band and the music.
And then in the mid-90s, you kind of started working on what would eventually become Youre Wondering Now.
That's right.
So what was the motivation for you behind beginning to start that project?
Well, at the time, in England especially, there'd been a late two-tone ska related boom in England in the late 80s, and from there it never really died down. It simmered, went underground sort of thing, and there was quite a big scene developing. ST Publishing were quite big at the time in doing. They used to have a magazine called the Skinhead Times. Basically, covered a lot of skinhead music, oi punk and ska especially, and that was the sort of like the main item you could go for info and news and other things. So it kept people up to date. And George then branched out. George Marshall, who was the owner, he branched out into publishing books, and he got the back catalogues of Richard Allen books, and he managed to publish them. And then George wrote a book on bad manners, and then subsequently wrote one on madness. And I'm thinking, this is all really good, but I don't want to read about madness or bad manners. And I thought, why has not anybody picked up on this? Because there had been nothing before that. And I thought, he's on the Specials, yeah. I thought it was for such a band with such an impact, not just on a socio-political scene or whatever, but just in the British music history as a whole. I thought, why is it not being done? So I tried to go around, to correct it. So.
And can you tell us kind of briefly a little bit about the research that you did? Did you speak to the band directly?
Well, George Marshall, God bless him, he gave me the address and a phone number for John Bradbury, the drummer. And I remember phoning John up and going burbling into the phone. You obviously thought I was a lunatic. He put the phone down. Anyway, I phoned him back again. I went from there, and it was fine. I interviewed John Bradbury. I spoke to Horace and Roddy, the guitarist. By this time, the band were pretty much all over the place, some in America, and so it's hard to get hold of some people. And Terry was pretty much, so he couldn't get hold of Terry at all at the time. And I did that, and I had such a vast collection of magazines and cuttings. It was just a matter of collating everything and then putting everything in a chronological order.
And you open the book with a chapter about the roots of ska music itself.
Yeah.
Why did you feel it was important to do that rather than just kind of launch straight into the special story?
I thought it was important because today especially the band still have a huge appeal, but not just of people of 40 years and plus. It's a lot of young people are into it now, because I see music as very much really splintered nowadays in so many different genres of so many different kinds of music, and I think it was aimed really at people getting into the band probably for maybe the first time as young people, and I think the history of the history of ska included is just about roots again, just so they know where they've come from and stuff like that, and how the Jamaican rude boy ties in what the specials were about, and a lot of it boils down to attitude and things. So that's why I thought it was important.
So I think it's fair to say that the leader, and certainly in the early days of the band, was the keyboard player Jerry Dammers.
Absolutely.
Who was also the main writer.
Yeah.
A lot of the ideals that he brought to the band, particularly the strong anti-racist stance, seemed to kind of be passed down from his father.
Yeah, his father obviously was a very respected member of the church, and I think he grew to be the Dean of Bristol at one stage. He, although being a staunch religious man, making Jerry take up piano lessons and things like that, which obviously have proved worthwhile in the future for Jerry. He was responsible for many different things in Bristol, for helping out the homeless and bringing to people's attentions things that would normally get brushed under the carpet. And I think just by clearly looking at Jerry and the way he went about doing things, and even still as he is now, them values and ideals from his father very much grown within himself.
And the way that the band kind of came together was quite organic, wasn't it, really? It was almost like fate.
Yes.
The way that they were all kind of friends of friends.
Yeah, things like that don't often happen in life, I don't think. It's a one-off, one-off. So Jerry's quite a clever man, and he obviously had seen who was the big sort of stars on the local scene, and he's hand-picked them, really. So he had a game plan in his head and pretty much stuck to it.
But they all kind of bought, I think, something different.
Absolutely.
In a way. It wasn't like they were all just kind of complete ska heads and nothing else. I think, would it be fair to say that was what made the band so unique, was because it was such a different range of backgrounds and influences?
I think you've hit the nail on the head with that. Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, as much as reggae men and ska men, there was punk. The guitarist Roddy, he's a rockabilly, an old punk rockabilly, and I think all their 7 members of the band, 7 sets of different ideas, 7 individuals, all bringing their own thing into the melting pot, was what became the specials.
And it seemed like they had quite a lot of belief in Jerry's sort of ideas and vision in those early days, particularly as, they weren't an overnight success, really.
No. Obviously, as you read on the book, you find that Jerry is the driving force behind everything. When times got really, really low, and there was plenty of times they thought it wasn't probably going to work out or worth it, what they were going through, it's Jerry's driving force and ambition that's kept everything ticking over. I also think that if it hadn't been for Jerry in those early days, then we would not have had the band, as they when they came to fruition. So.
And alongside working with the band, as you say, he also had this vision for creating a label that would allow not only specials recordings to be released, but those of other bands as well.
That's right.
And that was the concept of Two Tone was created, which then went on to launch the careers of bands like Madness and The Selector.
That's right.
How important do you think that the label part of it was to the special story?
It's an integral part, really. I think, obviously, when you mention the specials, I think, two-tone, they run side by side. They're both as important as each other. They were fed up with the way the music scene, especially major companies and things, were handling. There was no sort of route for up and coming bands at the time, really. It was all been a bit stifled by the old rock dinosaurs and people like that. So they'd gone through so many people who promised them things that and they came to the stage where we thought, well, let's just do it for ourselves. And I think that was another reason behind of bringing up other bands for Two Tone was because of that, really, because they've been treated like that in the past, and they wanted to help out bands that were in a similar situation to themselves. But at the same time, it also incorporates Jerry's idea of wanting something built on the idea of the Stax sound and Motown and stuff like that. And this is where the two-tone imagery comes into play. And having a label with a roster of bands is exactly what he was after. He knew exactly down to from the band members to the bands to the artwork to the sound of music. He knew exactly what he was doing.
Yeah, I read in the book that he actually even kind of came down to measuring the gaps between things on the artworks.
He did, yeah. I mean, if you look at the first album, the Specials album, there's a chunk missing out of the letter C. It's to make it look like it's an ironed-on transfer. That's not gone right. And that's his perfectionism.
Yeah. I mean, it was perhaps that kind of pioneering spirit of two-tone that led the band to press and release their first single, Gangsters, themselves without any record label backing. And indeed, it was probably the success of doing that off their own back that led to the interest that they finally got from labels. And they signed with Chrysalis eventually. Do you think that was the right label for them? And how important was it that Two Tone was retained and backed by Chrysalis as part of that deal?
I think at that time, personally, I would say Chrysalis probably were the best option, because Jerry had ironed out his plans and what he wanted. Basically, if you want us, you take Two Tone and take Two Tone's ideals and stuff, what we need to do. Chrysalis pretty much give him, free range, really. Whilst other record companies were offering them EP deals, see how it goes, we'll come back. If it does well, we may think of something later on. I think Chrysalis, and the fact that Roy Aldridge, who was the managing director of Chrysalis at the time, had seen them live, and he enthused about them, and the fact he was managing director, and they just would give it a bit more clout, really. So yeah, I think it was important that eventually, at the end of the day, Chrysalis actually owned Two Tone itself. That's how it was to be business wise, but I think that Chrysalis were the best option for them at the time, simply for the fact that they would take everything on board that was offered.
And you also write quite at length in the book about how great they were as a live band.
Absolutely.
Which brought a lot of people to their cause in the early days.
Mm-hmm.
What were they kind of like to watch as a fan?
That's a really good question. It's just been like witnessing an explosion about 3 inches from your face, really. A lot of people have said that it was a waste of time them recording, really, because they were the ultimate live experience, and they were just absolute. It was just chaos and mayhem, but perfection intertwined. Obviously, it's the live shows that makes them exciting, which means they get rave reviews, which brings more people in. But they were, and still probably are, one of the most top live bands, of music history.
And they, unfortunately, as part of that kind of live experience, they also had a number of problems with right-wing elements turning up to the gigs as their popularity grew.
Yeah.
How well do you think that they dealt with that in the live context?
As for the Specials especially, sorry about that. I think they did really well. They would often stop gigs if there was any racist trouble. They would address the problem directly from stage. Obviously, it didn't help towards a good show for the other people, but at least they were making a stand and a stance, and I think that they did everything physically possible that they could do to stop the right wing element. And I just think that of all the other bands, they were the ones that I mean, Man had a lot of trouble with being an only white band with the right wing element. And obviously, but they singled out the Specials more than anybody. Maybe that was because they made more of a noise when it came to the anti-racist thing, or I don't know. But they were quite a lot of times. I mean, at Hatfield they had a lot of trouble at Hatfield where some fascists broke into the back room and started slashing people up with knives and bottles and stuff. Again, but they dealt with it. I mean, in the way they do things. And you've got to take your hat off to the fact that to stop a concert and sometimes refuse to play until they're removed. You got to take your hat off to think people like that.
And then the band kind of moved forward and recorded the eponymous debut album, which was a quite stunning collection of songs, still massively popular and influential to this day. You describe in the book how, though it may have been slow to start, once the kind of momentum started for both the Specials and the UK ska scene in the late 70s period, it moved at an almost breathtakingly quick pace. It became immensely popular. Why do you think that was?
I think the crux of that matter is I think the country was just screaming out for something new. Punk was obviously pretty much dead by then, really. I think the charts, if you look at the charts at the time, it pretty much speaks for itself, really. Pretty bland, Brotherhood of Man were top of the charts, I think, one stage, which says it all. And basically that was it. Wasn't I think when it was in a political time of change, with Margaret Thatcher taking power, unrest, civil unrest, especially on the race matter. I think it was vitally important that something like came along to sort of try and bring people together or give somebody new to cling to. And of course, the complete package of the political and the danceability and the image appeal to all the young kids. And I think given that, it was just a matter of time before it exploded.
And the Specials in particular were enjoying, continued success with almost everything that they put out. And what should have been the high point of their career at that time, the first #1 single with Too Much Too Young, it was kind of soured a little bit because of the time they were on a tour of the US where there were kind of frustrations between band members creeping in at that point.
That's right. I mean, Too Much Too Young, the first #1, and Two Tone's first #1, their first #1. They were touring America. I think they were asleep when it was. News was announced, went to #1. The people were woken up and told the news, and then went straight back to sleep, which was such was the attitude of the band. But America was a bit of a rough time for the Specials. Not so much with having to get their points across or whatever point they need to take across or the music across. It was just the schedule. I mean, even before they'd made the sort of big time, shall we say, they'd been gigging a hell of a lot for 2 years without really much of a break. And I think in any walk of life, too much pressure basically, and being with the same people all the time, day in, day out. I think the cracks have started to appear.
So do you think that kind of treadmill was almost the root cause of this kind of beginning of the band having an internal tension about it?
Absolutely, yeah, I totally agree. That's the crux of the matter. I mean, they've even stated before, if they'd have had someone to say stop and let's take time out, have a breather, and then start again, and they didn't have that at the time. So, and that is definitely the root cause. I mean, it was just too much work.
But it seemed like the band kind of almost ignored those warning signs, if you like, to plough on with the recording of the second album, More Specials.
Yeah.
And some of the others seem to be kind of at odds with Jerry's sort of new musical direction that he was taking as the session started.
It was quite a drastic change from the first album, which was only a year old, really. But they had been playing the material on that album for quite 2 or 3 years prior to the album coming out, even. But More Special was a bit of a culture shock for all of them. I mean, Jerry's had this game plan in his mind since he was 10 years old, 12 years old, as he said in the media. And he was moving forward, and obviously it's a case of wanting to keep your fan base happy as well. But the thing, he was moving into more of a loungy Muzak style, away from the ska. And I think More Specials is actually a bit of a schizophrenic album, really, because you've got your first side is pretty much the ska is kept for a lot of the tracks there to please the fan base, but Jerry's experimental side comes out in side 2, which is completely different, to the other side. And it was definitely an area he was wanting to move forward into. But the other, like people like Roddy, were songwriters and having their own. By this time, the group had actually grown quite well musically and stuff. So they were all writing their own material, and they all had ideas of how their songs wanted to sound. And of course, Jerry was the chief arranger of the band, so he was having to put on drum machines and synthesizers and things like that, which didn't cut too well with the rest of the band. And again, as we go back to not having enough time off, they threw themselves straight into recording that album. And again, I think it was just part and parcel of why they ended up exploding in the end.
And as you said, that there seemed to be quite a dynamic change in that the other members were bringing their own material in, and Jerry kind of almost wanted to still retain that absolute control of everything.
That's right.
That he'd had since the early days. So that, and again, sort of created further tension, didn't it?
It did, because to some of the band members, it felt as if everything their input was being ignored, really. I don't think that was Jerry's intention. I just think he's such a focused mind. He had such a focused mind. It was pretty much tunnel vision, really. And to be fair, I think if Jerry hadn't had that sort of tunnel vision, you probably wouldn't have got things like his greatest moment with Nelson Mandela and the Special AK single and things like that. So yeah, but he became to the other band members a bit dictatorial. I don't think that was his intention. I don't think that was his intention at all. But it's just how it worked out. And again, 7 people, 7 sets of ideas, and I think that's where the problem started, because it's got to do with their input. He wasn't really listening to what they were saying. He was just driving forward what he thought was right, and unfortunately, it just made the cracks even wider.
Do you think that there was anybody around at that point that may have been able to kind of stop the spiral, or was it just a car with no brakes at that point?
It was very much a car with no brakes at that point. Yeah, that's what we're led to believe. I mean, all the research we've done and stuff says, they had management and things like that, but I think once it was just a monster by this time. Everything, not just Especially himself, but as Jared also had combined his work with Two Tone, which is separate from the band, and he was having to release other bands and stuff like that. So obviously there's added pressure as well. The Selector weren't happy at one stage the way things were run, and they actually left the label. Because they said, Jerry wants to do everything on his own, no matter what. Obviously, hindsight's a wonderful thing now, but at that time, it was pretty much a one-man show.
And Jerry kind of almost pushed himself to the limit, didn't he, recording that second album? He actually had some kind of a physical breakdown.
Yeah, I mean, he was with the album and the idea that we're going to have to tour again and to promote the album, and then obviously running Two Tone, it was a nightmare for him, really. And I think he made himself really ill with it, almost like nervous exhaustion, and I think the More Special tour virtually didn't even start at one point because he was that ill. It was the doctor was called on the day of the first gig, to see if he was going to be all right to carry on. So that's how close it came to all falling down around his ears.
And it's amazing, really, with all that going on, that the second album did contain some fantastic songs.
Absolutely.
Stereotype, Roddy's Hey Little Rich Girl, Pearl's Cafe. Mm-hmm. A lot of these songs were kind of the equal of what was on the first LP.
Exactly, I totally agree. I think it's one of them cases where out of chaos comes magic. That sort of thing comes beauty, and I think personally speaking, I think the album captures everything quite well, and I think you cater for everybody in that album. It helps new fans at the time, and it keeps the whole fans happy. And some songs on there were obviously hits. Songs like Do Nothing and Stereotype itself. And then of course you've got Hey Little Rich Girl, which you've mentioned, which to this day is an absolute special live classic. Everyone likes Hey Little Rich Girl.
Yeah.
So it caters for everybody, and like I say, out of while all this chaos and mayhem was going on, they managed to pull it off. I don't know how, but they did it.
as you say, it is sometimes the case, and with a lot of the great bands from history, that
Yeah.
those kind of internal tensions do create fantastic music.
Exactly, and that's what I believe. Yeah.
And the album was actually almost an immediate success. You know, it went on to get into the top 5 in the album chart.
That's right.
But again, those kind of things were soured a little bit by this kind of ongoing tension, and also the violence at the shows was kind of really increasing at that time.
Yeah.
And you detail in the book how it almost led to the end of touring at one point.
That's right. Yeah. They had problems on the prior tours, on the two-tone tour, but the more special one saw the violence really step up a gear. Really, a lot of it was to do with probably football-related violence as well, but obviously it doesn't help the matter in hand. And I think it was in Cambridge at the Super Tent there in Cambridge. They were playing with the Swinging Cats, and again, it was a football-related argument that started off the whole shenanigans, shall we say. I mean, the show was stopped a number of times. I mean, the support act Swinging Cats, they were involved in on-stage trouble, challenging people to fight on stage, and and then the specials came on, and they stopped the show quite a few times and threatened to walk off. And they eventually finished the show, but chaos ensued with the bouncers and stuff like afterwards and stuff, which resulted in Terry Hall and Jerry Downs being arrested for breach of the peace, and they would eventually get fined. I think about £400 each. I think it was at that time. I mean, they had a lot of people sticking up for them to say that they had tried to stop the trouble, but that was just one. That was the tip of the iceberg really for them, and they thought, well, if this is how it's going to be, then there's just no more point in touring anymore.
Incredible thing for a band to have to deal with. If you think of almost any band today that are regular top 10 hit makers. There's nothing like that they have to deal with as part of their tour. Almost night after night.
This is why I think this is why that makes them so special, shall we say? They would always make a stand. They would always make a stand on anything. If it was wrecking shows to right wing, to football elements trying to cause trouble, they'd always make a stand and say, look, we don't want it here. If you're going to do that when you come to our concerts, don't bother coming. And you've got to take your hats off to things like that. And as you've said, they don't have that to deal with anymore. The current bands. So it's hard for people to imagine exactly how it was at the time. And I think reading through the book, you get that sort of like ominous image of, how dangerous it was at times. Maybe go gigging at times, because it was quite dangerous.
And then early in '81, they did kind of take a little bit of a break. And then came back to start recording tracks for what would be the next single. Right. And the lead track from that was Ghost Town, which you describe in the book as a modern classic.
Yeah.
And is often seen by many people as kind of the pinnacle of their musical output.
Yeah.
What was it about that song that made it so momentous for you?
I think Ghost Town is the perfect time capsule. I think it captures... it's almost an audio photograph, shall we say, of the times that we lived in. It captures the dark political landscape. It covers the social aspects, the unrest, the race riots, especially, which were very prominent at the time. And it covers how the band, if you could even throw in there the band's, ongoing crumbling relationships in there as well. And I think it's just so dark and threatening song in a way. It covers everything. It's just a perfect time capsule for that moment in time, and for me it's obviously the height of their success.
And musically, it's there was nothing kind of out there that sounded like that at the time.
No, there's no, even now the record stands up. Even now, and I think, and the fact it was that it got to number one. It wasn't a pop song.
Yeah.
Is a major thing, because something like that wouldn't make it today. I don't think, not in the present climate.
No, I think you're right.
Yeah, I think just for the fact it got to number one, sounding like it did and covering what it did and what its lyrics were about, is a major triumph in anybody's lifetime. So.
No, it shows what a following that built up. Then they were.
It
adored.
does, yeah, and I mean, although you know, it wasn't a bouncy pop song, it's not a bouncy ska song, you know, and the fact it went to number one, possibly the two-tone element may have helped it get to number one, you know, it'd been released on two-tone, people still been to that sort of thing, but I don't think it was that. I think it was the fact that, I mean, you could not miss what it was aiming at. It was impossible to do so, so obviously you must take on board everything it was saying. And like I said, that message in that record stands today.
But unfortunately, the success of Ghost Town wasn't enough to kind of stop the tensions in the band running to a point where the split eventually came, which was on the second tour of America.
That's right.
When Terry, Neville and Linval said that they were going away to form their own band. The split kind of seemed to be a bit of a mixture of relief and frustration, upset for the band members. What was it like as a fan to hear that they were splitting?
I mean, as a fan, I recall it being quite a gutting experience, because I was very passionate about them as I am now, as I was then. Nothing's changed, and a lot of people felt the same way. It was like having this voice, and something you could adhere to and believe in, and all of a sudden it's taken away from you, so you've got nothing left. You know, it felt like you had nothing left. Obviously, that's just from a fan's point of view. I think the fact that the band sort of imploded around the success of Ghost Town testifies to the fact how bad things were inside the band at the time, and you know, and to go out at number one is probably the best way you're going to do it if you're going to go.
Yeah.
You know, so but yeah, as a fan, it was horrible.
And the second section of the book then goes on to recount what happened to the members of the band after they split up. You had Terry, Neville and Linval forming that band, which became Funboy 3,
Right.
and they had, you know, fairly good success, but short-lived. They split up themselves
Yep.
after a couple of years or
Yep.
so. You had Jerry going on with a couple of the other guys to keep a nugget of what was the original band, but develop it into the special AKA, which, as you said, they had a major hit with
That's right.
Nelson Mandela.
Yeah.
Would you say it's fair that in what they did afterwards, none of them kind of ever got that spark that they had together?
I think that stands out as quite as a big thing. Yeah, I mean, separately, they've never really. I mean, I don't think they ever craved success as people do now, and I think, but they seem to muddle through, in my eyes. You know, especially like I had, you know, a big a worldwide hit with Nelson Mandela. I mean, that's, you know, I mean, they were singing it. Amy Winehouse sang it at Nelson Mandela's 90th birthday, so you know it still stands there. It's still important to people. Terry had quite a successful solo career with two very critically acclaimed albums, but not proving itself chart wise. But yeah, I mean, I think they've together. You know, there's something about the band when they're together. I don't know what it is, and I don't think anybody can really put the finger on it. But it's just one of these magical moments in history. But separately, I don't think they've just muddled through really. I mean, obviously they've enjoyed doing what they're doing at the time because they're gigging musicians and working musicians. But when they come together as specials, it's just one of those rare moments.
And a lot of the guys actually, after a little while, did reform. Not kind of as the specials, but 3 or 4 of the original band came together and did do a few tours playing specials material.
Yeah, that resulted from an album they did with Desmond Dekker for Trojan, the King of Kings album. They realised that, you know, they could work well together. Played a few tentative shows to test the water, basically, especially in Japan, where the Japanese went absolutely mental for them, absolutely. Mobbing them in the streets, you know, they were loving it, you know, who wouldn't? So that gave them, obviously, a platform to work on. Plenty of songs written between themselves. Neville started to write, Linval writes what he was writing, and everything was looking rosy. They signed up to Ali Campbell's label, Cuff Records, to release an album called Today's Specials, which unfortunately was a covers album which bombed, and rightly so, because you can tell it sounds like Ali Campbell. It just sounds like UB40. But they went on and they ploughed on and managed to sign to an arm of MCA Records called Way Cool Records. And they had massive success in America with the shows and stuff like that. They released an album called Guilty Till Proved Innocent, and there's some good tracks on there. Some, if it hadn't, I mean, it's often been said, had they not called themselves the Specials as a recording artist and maybe gone for a different name, they would have done much better. I think the Specials name is just too big to play with, really.
Yeah. And then early in 2008 was the announcement that the band were officially getting back together, which had seemed almost an impossibility for years before. Yeah. The shows were unfortunately ultimately missing Jerry Dammers. Right. And some of the reasons that you detail in the book seem slightly strange. Do you think Jerry kind of still had that ultimate desire to be in control of everything, even, all those years on?
Yeah, I think he did. I mean, to be fair, in the core life day, the Specials and Two-Tone were his baby, and I think he did want the control. I think he doesn't like control being taken away from him. Again, understandable. But by this time, you're talking about a bunch of 50-year-old musicians. You can't bully a 50-year-old musician as you way you can maybe bully a 17-year-old musician. So, unfortunately, it was a lot of locking horns over the subject.
And it must have been quite something for an original devotee such as yourself to see the band back up on stage after all those years.
Well, I mean, it's surreal. I mean, the simple fact that you had even Terry Hall at the helm singing the songs again is a major plus, because just for the band's history as detailed in the book, I never ever foresaw this happening. Just could not imagine it. It'd been ongoing for a couple of years. It'd been rumbles and things like that. The 25th anniversary came, something was going to happen, something didn't happen. It was that sort of thing. So, obviously, it was announced in 2008 this was going to happen, and I mean, the results speak for themselves. I mean, obviously, there was worries probably maybe a Dammersless Specials would cause a bit of, ticket sales, would things sell and stuff, but I mean, went off the scale.
I think tickets kind of sold out in...
Well, I know
minutes almost in some cases.
Well, on this. I'm an administrator on the Specials2.com, which is a fans forum, and we working with the Specials management on a pre-sale, and we know for a fact that I think on the pre-sale, I think virtually all the tickets for Birmingham were sold out in 4 minutes, but the whole tour had probably gone in 2 hours.
Which shows, I think, both that original fan base is still there, but that the music has travelled down to a new generation.
It has. I mean, I attended many of the 2008 gigs, the 2009 gigs, and it's not. I mean, yeah, the audience is 40 plus in a lot of them. There's a lot of stretch fed Perrys and tight jeans about, but there's a lot of young people, a hell of a lot of young people. So whether that acts as a catalyst for maybe them to maybe go and do some extra work, new material, even, who knows.
I was going to say that. Do you think that the reunion is the end of another chapter in the story, or maybe the beginning of one?
There's two factions, two camps. There's the ones that, let's celebrate what we had, 30th anniversary, all makes sense, do the tour, wrap it up, put the baby back to bed, sort of thing. But they're such good musicians. Musically, they sound even better than they did in '79. There's a lot of songwriting skill in that team. So, I mean, it's quite appealing, mouth-watering even just to... But the problem, to get new material, but the problem they're going to have is that if they record anything without Jerry Dammers, then they're going to have to be... The album's going to have to be 200% tight. Otherwise, they're going to get panned to death by critics. And
is there still a possibility that we may see Jerry as part of the band again?
There is chances we could, I think. As Terry Hall maintained once in a statement, the door's still open. And while that remains so, then there's hope for everybody.
So finally, has writing the book made you look at any aspect of the band in a different way than you did when you were kind of just a fan?
Yeah, I think if you delve deep into these sort of things, you do get a completely different perspective of things, for one thing, and where things have run. And you can respect why the split happened originally. You can respect Jerry's tunnel vision, really, and understand the man better. You can also understand why as burgeoning songwriters, the others didn't want to go down the path that Jerry wanted to go down. It's a lot of it's catch-22 really, do you know? So as a fan, it's been riveting for me to write this book and find that and find out what's, and you know, the history of the band and so forth, and to realise that we have been so lucky to have this band, you know, for us to go see and listen to. We're so lucky.
And what, you know, hopefully it's an ongoing story, but what do you think the legacy of the part one of the band, if you like, is?
Well, the legacy is everything. It's the, you know, I mean, the two-tone imagery. I talk about imagery a lot, but it is quite an important part. That still stands up. I mean, the political measure, because there was not many bands around who've done the sort of things they've done. I mean, I think since Two-Tone, realistically, that's probably the last biggest youth movement you've seen. And I don't think you've seen, and you won't see anything much more, I don't think. And that speaks volumes. And the fact that, you know, just the lyrics, and you know, it captures. It's all to do with, I suppose, it's all retro-y. It's all to capture a moment in your life and other people's lives and stuff, so we can all relate to it and stuff. But it also, the lyrics stand up for the people getting to the young kids getting into them today, of you know, racial tolerance, you know, and you can do things for yourself. You don't need anybody else, and that's the important message that is not being relayed by bands of today.
Well, thanks for coming in, Paul. It's been a great discussion, and don't forget that the book Youre Wondering Now, the specials from conception to reunion, is out now on Cherry Red Books. Join us next time for more Cherry Red TV. Goodbye.